Hey, so this lesson follows section 9.2 in your book, and it's a closer look at cellular respiration. So, quick reminder, cellular respiration is the process that our cells use to break down food into energy in the form of ATP. So a good general formula for respiration is sugar, or food, plus oxygen creates carbon dioxide and water and ATP. And a good way to remember this is to remember that the word for respiration also means breathing, right? So you breathe in, your body's taking in the oxygen that you need for this process. And when you breathe out the carbon dioxide, which is the waste product from this process. So if you can remember, breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, that's half of the equation. So let's dive in deeper to what's happening in our cells when we're breaking down food. So here's just a quick overview. It starts in the cytoplasm with a process called glycolysis. And then you're going to get some ATP. Some electrons are going to get carried. Remember, hot potatoes, basically. They're high energy electrons that are coming off of the glucose. They're going to get used later. So the products from here are going to enter the mitochondria, and they're going to get broken down further in a couple more cycles. And in the end, we're going to end up with a whole bunch of ATP that our cells can use for energy. So let's take a closer look at step 1. And make sure you have this paper with you. It's got the bubbles on it. Cellular respiration. So we're going to fill in these bubbles as we go. So the first bubble at the top, cellular respiration, begins with glucose. So you can fill that bubble in and pause if you need to. And glucose is broken down in the process called glycolysis. So that's the bubble just below the first one. Glycolysis literally means sugar breaking. So glyco looks kind of like glucose, right? And then lysis means break apart. So glycolysis is the step that breaks glucose in half to make two molecules that are called pyruvate. And pyruvate, all the words you're going to use on your sheet are underlined. Pyruvate goes right down the chain. So glycolysis produces pyruvate. And this process, again, occurs in the cytoplasm. So that's another bubble to fill in. And this happens really fast. So this is going on millions of times every second in your cells. And then what comes out besides pyruvate is that 2 ATP is generated. So that's the last little bubble that's going to come off of the glycolysis section. And it also charges up a couple of electron carriers. So the one that we use most in cellular respiration is called NAD. It's not too important to memorize the structures of these, but hopefully you can recognize when you see NAD that this is an electron carrier. So a couple of NAD electron carriers are charged up with some high energy electrons, and they become this molecule NADH. And these are going to come in handy a little bit later. So it generates 2 ATP, not a whole lot. We're going to get some more energy out in the next couple of steps. So here is a visual overview of glycolysis. We've got glucose coming in, pyruvate coming out, generates 2 ATP, and then 2 of our electron carriers, which are also kind of like little batteries. So NAD is not charged up. We put on some high energy electrons and it becomes a charged up NADH. We got 2 of those. All right, The next step is the Krebs cycle, and it uses the pyruvate that was made in glycolysis. So on your bubble chart, right underneath pyruvate, it says that is used in aerobic respiration. We call this section and the next section aerobic respiration because it requires oxygen or air. So aerobic sounds like air, right? So aerobic respiration starts with the Krebs cycle. That's that little bubble there. So in this process, this is where your carbon dioxide is released. So the carbon that was in the glucose, which is now in the pyruvate, is going to be further broken down, and that carbon is going to end up in the carbon dioxide that we breathe out. This occurs inside the mitochondria. So this is one of your bubbles on your sheet. And the Krebs cycle has a net yield of 2 ATP. That means 2 more ATP were made in this cycle. And then a bunch more electron carriers get charged up. So we've got our old friend NAD, and then we have a new one that we haven't seen before, FAD, but you can tell they're related. They're like cousins. Pretty much the same thing. So from the Krebs cycle, we're going to end up with 6 NADH. That's one of your bubbles. And 2 FADH. That's the other bubble coming off of the Krebs cycle. All right. Now, these electron carriers, plus the ones from glycolysis, are finally going to get used up in the third step, which, just here's a visual of the Krebs cycle. So before we move on, Krebs cycle starts with pyruvate, goes around, and little bits of energy are pulled off at different sections. So we've got CO2 breaking off. We've got electron carriers getting charged up. Here and here, more CO2. Here's where ATP gets made. And a couple more electron carriers get charged up. Since there's 2 pyruvate molecules that come off of one glucose, you get to do this twice for every glucose molecule. Don't worry too much about the details of it, though I know it looks pretty scary. Okay, so our electron carriers are going to go dump their electrons into the electron transport chain. So this is the second to last bubble. So all of these electron carriers from the Krebs cycle get used in electron transport chain. And I know you can't write all that in the little bubble, but just right outside of the bubble, that's fine. So again, this also happens in the mitochondria. So those high energy electrons that we took off of the glucose when we broke it down little bit by little bit, they're passed into the electron transport chain, and then they'll get bumped from one carrier to the next from proteins inside the mitochondria. And as these electrons get passed along, the energy from them is going to get used to make ATP. And at the end of the chain, you need oxygen. So I've got this nice big in red. This part isn't on your chart, but oxygen is kind of the key part to this. And this is the whole reason why we breathe in oxygen. It's this step right here. So at the end of the electron transport chain, we need oxygen because it's the final electron acceptor. So all those electrons, they were high energy. All that energy gets used to make ATP. And then, so now the low energy electrons are going to get dumped onto oxygen and then combined with some hydrogen ions to make water. So water also comes out, right? When you breathe out, you get carbon dioxide. You also get some water. So that water is from the oxygen accepting those electrons. And then this step makes a whole lot more ATP. So around 36 ATP is what we get per glucose. So this is a really important step. That's why it's so important to have oxygen. And then here's a picture. Again, I know it's a little scary looking, but basically here's our electron carriers. They're dumping their electrons into the chain here and here, and then going on their merry way. This is super important because these need to drop off the electrons they have so that they can be reused. So they can go back and pick up new electrons in glycolysis or in the Krebs cycle so that glucose can continue to be broken down. And then the electrons go through, the energy is going to get used to make ATP, and then at the end we need oxygen here to accept those electrons, and then it'll become water. So your bubble sheet's not quite filled out yet. There's one more chain. We're going to get to it in a minute. But I'm going to let you take a quick brain break. So here's a funny video that somebody made. I don't know who. And if you want to skip it, you can, but I think it's pretty funny. So somebody made this to help people remember cellular respiration. Let's see. Let me make sure you can hear it. And that's up. Okay, we'll try this.
Your cells will start it in glycolysis. Some glucose will be broken to pyruvate. Just repeat. C6H12O6 until it sticks. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me. Now this pyruvate moves down through the double membrane in the mitochondrial matrix. Chain is broken even further. Krebs cycle gives electrons NAD and FAD. Each turn in the cycle yields 1 ATP. However, since the chain is broken, it must make the cycle twice for each glucose. This will give us 2 ATP. Or 4 so far. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me. Carriers take their new charge through the crystal not too far and drop them in the electron transport chain. As the electron passes through, it sparks a proton pumping through, and H fills the inner membrane space. Gradient that this creates was H plus through ATP synthase and generates a lot more ATP for you and me. In this final step of cellular respirations, our cells produce 32 to 34 more ATP. Just realize glucose fully oxidized, 38 ATP are synthesized. Use your energy so you can rise. Open your eyes. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me. Sugar goes to ATP. Fuel for birds and you and me.
All right. I'm going to start a new movie when you are ready to move on to fermentation.